Hey there everybody, it's Mike DiLisio with another solo mode review. Today I'm going to be taking a look at the solo mode for Pendulum from designer Travis Jones, publisher Stonemaier Games. Pendulum is a real-time worker placement game, so let's head over the table. I'll show you briefly how the solo mode plays out, then I'll come back here and give you my final thoughts. Okay, here we have a basic setup for a solo game of Pendulum. Now, it's not completely set up. I don't have my player board completely filled or things along those lines, but I really just want to have a focus on what the solo elements of this are. So, first, let's talk about component changes. What is added or removed to the game? Well, in Pendulum, the Automa is going to have its own board. And so right here we have the Automa board, and it's got its own deck of cards. So those are specific to the solo game and are only used in the solo game. What you're going to do during setup is you're going to choose two colors. So you're playing against two opponents, Automa 1 and Automa 2. And in this case, I just chose the black player for Automa 1 and the white player for Automa 2. And I have a corresponding marker on this shared point track. Okay? The thing you need to do during setup as well is determine the difficulty that you're going to be playing on. And this is going to determine what happens during the council phase. It's going to determine during the 4 council phases of the game how many votes are going to be the modifiers for the votes and the modifiers for the victory points. I'll show you how those work in a minute. A is the simplest. You can see a lot of negative numbers there. It's actually going to be removing numbers of votes and victory points from the cards that you draw. B is the one they recommend you start on as kind of the basic difficulty. A would be easy. Then you've got C, and you can see the numbers are going to be much higher here. D, E, and F. All right, being the most difficult. So let's say I decided I'm going to go for B. I would place that there. The other cards can just be removed. They're not needed for the rest of the game. And you're essentially ready to go. So what I've done here is I've shown you that, let's say I was playing as blue. I have my characters that I could have placed according to some rules, but these are blocking players. These are all the Automa workers out there kind of blocking where I go, all right? And what you're going to do is on your turn, you're going to act as normal. So let's say we started the round, I'm flipping over the timers are flipped, and now I could potentially do my action. So the way the game works, generally speaking, is you can place and remove workers anywhere, any row where there is not a timer. And you can take the actions only on the rows where there is a timer. So I could take both these actions, doing this action, which is basically spending nothing to do my yellow banner, getting 2 gold, getting a vote, not spending anything. Other things have costs. Only this black area is primarily without cost. And so you take your turns as normal. What's going to trigger the automas are told to you right here. So it tells you automas trigger when you move a worker off the bottom box of an action space, or the purple timer has run out and you flip the green or the black timer. So let's say, for example, this had moved back up here and I now want to remove this worker so that I can place it somewhere else. Before I place it, I have to flip over an automa card, and it's going to give me a bit of information. So the right side is only used during the council phase. I don't pay any attention to that during the main play phase. I'm looking over here. So what it's telling me is that there's no worker movement, but potentially there are timer movements. So what this is saying is, first, flip that purple timer if it hasn't run out. Well, or if it has run out. Well, it has not run out. Then it's not saying the green, and it's saying if you can't do the purple, then do the black. And in this case, if this came up and it actually had run out, I would then flip it. If it hadn't run out, if it was still kind of releasing sand, then nothing would happen with this card. There are some cards that give you worker movement. Well, there's some that show nothing. This one shows you some worker movement. It's either going to be a purple worker or a green worker, never in the black because they don't block the black area. So if the purple worker shows up, what you do is you look to the row in the corresponding area and you take the leftmost worker and you move it to the space where there is no automa. So in this case, if the purple worker is moving, it's moving here, okay? If this had come up again and it was still like this and the timer was still here, he would move there. All right. There are also cards that tell you to move the green worker, and it works exactly the same way. If this had come up here, I would move the leftmost worker on the row with the green timer and move it up there. As you can see, this is a way to cycle the workers around to keep them potentially blocking you from places you might want to go. All right, so those trigger every time you pull a worker off of an action space, the bottom part of an action space, or when the purple timer is run out and you want to flip the green or the black timer. That can lead to some interesting push your luck element where you're trying to get another action or two out and hoping that you don't flip over a card that shows you the purple timer, because then potentially you can't take those actions. So that's how the main play phase works. It's during the council phase that we are going to be determining the points and the votes that the automas get. So during the council phase, what you're going to do is you're going to draw 3 cards for each automa and splay them out along the left side of their board. 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3. Now in this case, all we're doing is looking at the left side of the card, or the right side of the cards, excuse me. So in this case, let's start with the votes, all right? Because this is going to be determining the order of the Imperial, I think it's privilege track. Basically, it's a turn order thing in the multiplayer game, but in the solo game, it primarily is going to determine what rewards you get, if any. And so we would look at this, we would add them up. In this case, for the black automa player, we have 1 plus 2 plus 3, so that's 6 votes, modified by -2 in the first council phase, so 4 votes for the black player. 1 plus 1 minus 1 is 1. -2, so they're actually at 0. You would never go below that. So 0 votes for the white automa player. We said 4 votes for the black automa player, and then I would compare how many votes I had accumulated during that round. You would make any adjustments that you would need to here, and you would gain corresponding rewards. So let's say, for example, that the automa 1 had gotten the most votes, just like it shows here. I had second, and white had third. At that point, the automa 1 would get 2 movements on this track. I would be able to move one of my tracks up 1, and then they're going to choose a card from the row over there. So it tells you in order down here what card you're going for. They're saying if there's one that shows spend 2 coins to move up the yellow track, take that card away. Well, there's not. This is telling you to take the move a regular worker to a grande worker. That card is always out there. You would flip it over, and now it's not available to me because I'm second. I would be able to choose my card at this point. For victory points, it works exactly the same way. You count them up. 2 minus 2, so 0 victory points there. The automa 2 has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Minus 2 is 3, so you'd move whites up that far as well. So that's what happens during the council phases. These are going to be moving up, potentially getting into the parchment area. You're trying to get into the parchment area, and it's going to work just like the multiplayer game. At the end of the game, if you have not achieved the legendary achievement, you are not eligible to win. The automas are always assumed to have achieved the legendary achievement, so they're always going to be eligible to win. If you get all of your trackers into the parchment, including the legendary achievement, and the automas have not, you've won the game. If one of the automas gets into the parchment and you have all of yours in the parchment, you're going to do a scoring where you're going to determine how far into the parchment you are as opposed to the automa, and the winner will be determined at that point. All right, well, that's a general overview of the solo game. Let's head back and I'll give you my final thoughts. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a pretty good idea on how the solo mode plays out for Pendulum. The first thing I want to do is talk about some solo benchmarks. These are some items that I always talk about when I'm doing solo reviews. The first thing I want to talk about is win conditions. Is this a clear win-loss condition, or is it a beat your high score type of a game? Well, this is an Automa Factory game, and those pretty much across the board are virtual opponents. And this is no difference in the solo game of Pendulum. You're actually playing against 2 virtual opponents. So they did something similar in Tapestry as well. So you have 2 automas that you are playing against. They are blocking spots. They are going to be gaining victory points. They're going to be gaining votes that are going to affect those council phases. And so you definitely have a clear win-loss condition. You know at the end whether you've won or lost, and there's really no ambiguity. I feel like in a worker placement game, that's pretty essential. You need to have a clear win-loss condition, and Pendulum certainly fits the bill there. The second thing I'd like to discuss is setup and teardown, because oftentimes that can be a deciding factor on whether you get a game off the shelf for a solo game or not. Now, the amount of time it takes to set up Pendulum is actually quite rapid. It doesn't take a lot of time to set up Pendulum. There's not a overwhelming amount of components. There's not a lot of things that you have to account for on the board. The Automa is very simple to set up. They have their own board. They've got a deck of cards. The only thing that takes a bit of time is that you have to go and get neutral player colors pieces, but that really is not a huge issue. The amount of game experience that you get is very commensurate with the amount of time that you put in at the beginning, and it doesn't take really much time at all to tear it down. So I have nothing negative to say about the setup and teardown time for Pendulum. The last solo benchmark I like to discuss is the rules. And as has been the case with just about every Automa game, the rules I find are clear, well laid out. They're in their very own rule book. They're not even a part of the regular rule book. This is something that has been a hallmark of Automa Factory games. They get their own rule book with their own list of components, and I think that that is fantastic. They kind of lead the industry in this way in solo gaming, where they have kind of dedicated components, dedicated rule books. The rules are clear, they're well thought out, they don't leave ambiguities in most cases, and so I had no issues at all with the rules for the solo game of Pendulum. So, overall solo experience. So this one is one where I'm going to do kind of a pros and cons list, because there are a number of things that I enjoyed about the game and a number of things I had some issues with. So I'm just going to go down the list. I'm actually going to start with the pros. The Automa system is extremely well done in Pendulum. This is a game that when I first heard it described, thought that it would be remarkably difficult to pull off a solo mode, because you've got not only those typical areas of interaction that you'll find in a worker placement game, but you've got this real-time element as well. And honestly, at first I thought, well, almost certainly they're going to do the solo mode in the non-timed variant, but it's exactly the opposite. You have to play the solo mode with the timed element. You can't play it with the untimed version. And they did a really good job, and I think that's difficult to pull off for a real-time game. I will say that the first couple of games, there was obviously a learning curve where you had so much that you're accounting for on your turn, and it was a little bit of I needed a little bit of an internalization of how things worked before I was confident that I was always triggering those Automa cards when I needed to. But once a couple of games were in, I felt pretty confident that I was catching most of the things that I was supposed to be as a solo player. So well done Automa system, as they generally are. This has a good worker placement feel. I am a fan of worker placement games in general, and there's an interesting twist on the restrictions. You know, normally in a worker placement game, especially in a solo worker placement game, the main thing that's going to be happening is spots are going to be blocked to you. And while that is certainly the case here, when you add those timers in, that's another layer on top of it. And so I like that. That's not specific to the solo game, that's in the game in general, but it also works well in the solo game. Another positive is that there's good opportunity for engine building. If you're a fan of engine building like I am, there's a good way to do that through building up your banner powers. That can be a very satisfying element of the game. Another positive is those specific character cards that you get, that 4-card deck that is specific to each character. Really, I like the interaction that those cards give. I like being able to play those at opportune times, be able to spend my culture to get those back. You can almost combo those cards, and there are ways to really create some satisfying secular plays where you just are really kind of churning through those cards, and the fact that those can be done at any time is also something I like in the game quite a bit. So those are really satisfying, those card elements. All right, so Some things that did not work as well for me in this game. First of all, it's really no fault of Pendulum's, but I am a gamer. I'm not a huge fan of real-time games. So that's something that really needs to be taken into account, is that in general, real-time games are a hard sell for me. I don't particularly enjoy that feeling of franticness. I don't particularly enjoy that feeling of induced stress on a turn beyond the inherent stress that comes about with trying to make the best play. Now, I will say that Pendulum doesn't quite have that frantic feel for me personally. I know other people that I've played with have felt still that frantic real-time element. I haven't really felt that in the multiplayer games, and I don't feel it as much in the solo game. The biggest element of that, I think, of that real-time element kind of getting in the way, is there have been multiple times where I have kind of botched end of the round situations because the timers kind of got me, so to speak. But that's part of the game. And so if you like real time, this likely won't be an issue for you. But for me, I don't love real time as a design philosophy. The art and the graphic design I find uninspiring. There's really nothing about the art and the board that draws me into it. I don't think it's the type of game that if you're walking past the table, you're going to be wowed by the art. You might be intrigued by the timers, but I feel like there's some missed opportunities here. I feel like the best art come on the, I can never remember what they're called, like the landscape, the square cards that you place under your player board. But they're shrunk to such a size that you really can't even enjoy it. And so I feel like the color palette, the art and graphic design is functional, but uninspiring and doesn't really draw me in. The aesthetic doesn't pull me in. The timers can be a bit problematic. Now, this could just be one particular issue that I have, but I have had issues where the timers have not gone. They have not begun. It's mostly with the purple and green timers, and that can be an issue. You do have to kind of keep an eye on it. Now, it's going to be affecting, if you're playing in a multiplayer game, it's going to be affecting all the players. So, you know, as long as everyone's kind of keeping an eye, that's not usually an issue. But in the single player game, I feel like I have to remember, okay, when I flip those timers at the beginning of a round, or really anytime I'm flipping those timers, make sure that those grains are going. And sometimes it's hard to see whether the grains are going. I think anytime you have a game with timers, this can be something you have to consider, but I have had issues in my games of Pendulum. One of the issues I have with the game is that it feels tremendously abstract to me. I know that there's a theme in the game, and the rule book does a nice job of kind of presenting that theme, but there's nothing in the gameplay at all that makes me feel that theme. The game feels quite mechanical. It feels really, really abstract. Now, your mileage may vary whether that's an issue for you or not, but I did feel a bit of a disconnect. I really felt like, okay, what this is about is moving up those tracks, just sliding up those tracks, and I never really felt like what I was doing had any thematic connection at all to moving up those tracks. Even if the art had been a bit more or had given me more of a reason to feel like I'm, you know, my own unique entity trying to become the new timeless king, maybe that would have helped, but it just wasn't there for me. I'm also concerned. Now, I can't say this definitively, so I'm not saying it definitively, but I have concerns that there are potentially some necessary strategies that you need to pursue to be successful in the solo game and in the multiplayer game. I don't want to state them here, and I'm not trying to be too vague, but I don't want to ruin anyone's enjoyment of discovering the game on their own, and I could be wrong here, but I do have some sneaking suspicions that there are certain necessary strategies that you need to follow to be successful in the game. So, all of that being said, there's a lot of things I like about the game. There are a number of issues that I have with the game. Overall, I feel like because of my lack of enjoyment on real-time games in general, because of what I feel is a distinct lack of theme and uninspiring art, I don't feel like I can confidently give this a recommendation as a solo game. It's not far off. I'm rating this a 6.5 out of 10. I think that for some gamers, this will really work for them, but for me, it really didn't quite get there. It just missed the mark. Thank you for your time as always, and have a great day.